All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday morning, September the 3rd, 2024. Hope you had a great Labor Day, and hope you're having a beautiful day so far today. I want to thank you for your faithfulness in walking with us as we serve the Lord together. And if our ministry, the content of our ministry is a blessing to you, please help us and to continue to expand our impact, to expand our reach, to make the love of Yeshua known, to make the word of the Lord known in every place that we can. You can do that. Of course, you can always do that by partnering with us financially. You can give. You can go to shalomaz.com/give. You can do that on the app. If you haven't downloaded the app, we encourage you to do that. And then, of course, on our with our videos, if you hit like and comment and you subscribe and then, of course, share, that, of course, always helps. So thank you again for your faithfulness. Well, the title of today's Daily Manna is An Eternal River of Living Water. We are continuing in Revelation. We are now we're beginning the final chapter, Revelation 22. We're going to be looking at verses 1 and 2 today. But back to Revelation 21. John writes, "Then I saw a new heaven," verse 1, "and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I also saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I also heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Behold, the dwelling of God is among men.'" The tabernacle, the tent of God is among men, "and he shall tabernacle among them." The same dwelling and tabernacle in the Greek, it's the same word there, the skinis, he will skinose among them. "They shall be his people, and God himself shall be among them and be their God. He shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Nor shall there be mourning or crying or pain any longer, for the former things have passed away. And the one seated upon the throne said, 'Behold, I am making all things new.'" Right. So up to that point, it had been, there was a voice from the throne saying all of this, but now the one seated on the throne, he himself says, "Behold, I am making all things new." Then he said, "Write, for these words are trustworthy and true." He said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I am the cause, the beginning, and I am the goal, to the end. To the thirsty, I will freely give from the spring of the water of life." I want you to hold on to that phrase, from the spring of the water of life, spring of living water. Skip ahead to verse 9. "Then one of the seven angels holding the seven bowls full of seven final plagues, then came one of the angels holding the seven bowls full of the seven final plagues. And he spoke with me, saying, 'Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb.' Then he carried me away in the Ruach, in the Spirit, to a great and high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God." Verse 15, "The angel speaking with me had a gold measuring rod to measure the city and its gates and walls. The city is laid out as a square, its length the same as its width. He measured the city with the rod, 12,000 stadia. Its length and width and height are equal." So length, width, height equal. It's a cube, right? So it's a 1,500 miles cubed. And so this whole city, the Holy of Holies was a cube. The whole city is the most holy place, is the eternal most holy place. Verse 22, "I saw no temple in her in the city, for its temple is Adonai Elohei Tzevaot and the Lamb, and the city has no need for the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God lights it up, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations shall walk by its light, and the kings of the earth bring their glory into it. Its gates shall never be shut by day, for there shall be no night there. And they shall bring into it the glory and honor of the nations. And nothing unholy shall ever enter it, nor anyone doing what is detestable or false, but only those written in the book of life." Chapter 22. "Then the angel showed me a river of the water of life, or a river of living water, bright as crystal, radiant, shining, gleaming like crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Down the middle, verse 2, down the middle of the city's platea, the city street, the city square. On either side of the river was a tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. So what we have here is we have this river of living water flowing down right through the center, right? And the imagery of all of this is powerful. And the reality is the imagery isn't new. I mean, a lot of it, there's a fullness to it, there's a newness, but it's reminiscent of something that the Lord is bringing us back to, right? He's making all things new, but this is a restoration, too, to when all things were new, a restoration to the Garden of Eden, when the Lord was in our midst, when the Lord walked among us in the cool of the day. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 8, we read this, verses 8 through 15. It says, "Then Adonai Elohim planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Then Adonai Elohim caused to sprout from the ground every tree that was desirable to look at and good for food. Now the tree of life was in the middle of the garden, and also the tree of knowledge of good and evil. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden," right? So you have two trees. You have tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil. We saw in the new city, there's a river, and it's got a tree of life on each side with bearing fruit, 12 kinds of fruit each in its season. Anyway, a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden. From there it divided and became 4 riverheads. The name of the first is Pishon, the one that winds around the whole land of Havilah where there is gold. The gold of that land is good. Bdellium and lapis lazuli stones are also there. Verse 13, the name of the second river is Gihon. It winds around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris. It runs east of Assyria. And the fourth river is Euphrates. Verse 15, then Adonai Elohim took the man and gave him rest in the Garden of Eden in order to cultivate and watch over it. So those 4 rivers, there's one river with 4 that's split into 4 heads, right? And those rivers are still famous today. 2 of them are the Tigris and the Euphrates. They kind of form the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia. And concerning the other 2 rivers, the Gihon and the Pishon, it's not as clear. But these rivers which fed the earth flowed from the source of Eden. And we don't know how long it was, right? We don't know how long in the garden it was until they ate the fruit. We know Adam lived 930 years, but we don't really get the details of his life in that story. We just get a couple of highlights and lowlights. But there had been this relationship with God in the garden, a walking with him. There had been abundance and delight, and everything that you needed was there. And God walking with them in the garden. It said in the Ruach Hayom, in the spirit, in the breath of the day. The Lord had given them life right in the center, right? Food that was there for them to enjoy. It was all beautiful to look at. It was all good for food. It was a river bursting forth, a source of water in Eden that brought life and refreshment to the earth. And the Lord had warned them, don't eat from the tree, this other tree of knowledge of good and evil. He warned them of the death that would follow. But eventually they were deceived by the deceiver, right? And they decided to believe the word of another rather than trust the word of the Lord. And so the curse of sin, the curse of death descended upon humanity, upon the earth. But the Lord instituted a plan right away to make all things new, right? And as part of that long-term plan, God chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, chose Israel, chosen to be the conduit through whom all the families of the earth would be blessed. And so later, the Lord gives us more instructions, right? More detailed instructions, what we call Torah. He gives us instructions. He said, obey, follow my way, and there will be blessings. If you ignore and violate this, there are curses that are experienced, right? And so this time, before the Lord had given that very life and death, and he says you're going to die if you disobey. Well, now he describes at the end of Deuteronomy in greater specificity what the blessings of life look like, what the curses of death look like. And then he implores us. He says, choose life that you and your children may live. But our ancestors kept choosing death. And so much later, through the prophet Isaiah, the Lord called out to us in Isaiah 55:1, "Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why do you spend money for what is not bread, your wages for what does not satisfy?" And then he says, "Shema, Shemoah, Shema, Shema, listen diligently to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourself in abundance," right? So the Lord's calling out, again, now he calling out with passion in Isaiah, pay attention, right? Why are you wasting all of your energy, all of your resources to buy what doesn't satisfy when I have given you all that is good for you? So he says, listen carefully, right? Hear me, eat what is good, and delight yourself in abundance. The word that for abundance there is the fatty stuff, right? Delight yourself, oneg, your whole being, like your whole nephesh, your whole soul, right? Not just in the bare necessities. The Lord doesn't speak of just survival there. He speaks of the delicacies, the delicious, the sweet, the savory. What you truly thirst for, what you truly hunger for, cannot be satisfied with what you can buy with money. You're striving for satisfaction, striving for sustenance, only provide you with something that's momentarily fulfilling, right? Temporarily satisfied. The thirst returns, the hunger returns, right? The thirst that you're capable of quenching, you get thirsty again. The hunger you're capable of satisfying, you get hungry again. But there is a thirst and there's a hunger that you cannot satisfy. And the Lord is saying, what I have to offer you is costly, it's priceless, it's so valuable, you could never afford it. But he says, listen, I want to give it to you, right? And so this was the call through the prophet Isaiah. And so much later, God with us, Emmanuel, God with us, came into our midst, tabernacled among us, right? Yeshua, the Word was with God. The Word was God. He dwelt among us. He tabernacled among us. And so we have this imagery, the New Jerusalem, the Lord saying, I will dwell among you. The Lord says, behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and I will tabernacle with you. I will dwell in your midst. And so when Yeshua walked the earth, there was, during this passage from Isaiah 55, he basically pointed to it during the Feast of Tabernacles, what we call Sukkot, Feast of Tents, Tabernacles. And this... So the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, is something that we read about in the Torah. In the midst of the Torah, in the midst of God's instructions, the Lord, so much of what he was doing was giving us parables, right? Word pictures that would point us toward spiritual ultimate realities. So, for example, he gave us Passover to illustrate the slavery of sin, to illustrate our deliverance through the sacrificial Passover lamb, pointing to what Yeshua would do. Though we couldn't have grasped it in the immediacy of that when Yeshua did it, we were able to make that connection. And so, one of the key illustrations he gives, there's parables that these feasts are parables in nature. And one of them is Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And tabernacles, right, when the Lord gives it to us in Leviticus 23, is to remind us when we lived in tents in the wilderness, to remind us that God dwelt in a tent in our midst in the wilderness, that he tabernacled with us, and that he had provided for us all that we needed. If you were thirsty, if you were hungry, he was the one who provided. So during Sukkot, it's 7 days of living in frail booths, remembering the wilderness, remembering our own frailty, remembering that in the wilderness God was in our midst, in a tent, in a sukkah, with us. He led us in the wilderness. He led us in the desert. In the we were covered by cloud in the midst of the hot desert days, and he was our covering, a fire by night. He was our protector in the cold nights. He fed us with manna. He gave us water from a rock, right? The least likely of places. And so through the years, in conjunction with these themes that are surrounding that Sukkot was pointing to, there were different traditions that developed. And one of those traditions, in memory of, we're remembering when we were in the wilderness and remembering of the Lord's provision of water in the desert, water from a rock. One of the ceremonies that was developed was called the water drawing ceremony, the Simchat Beit Hashovea, or Hashoeva, literally the rejoicing of the house of water drawing. And so there was this ceremony, and right at the heart of this ceremony there was an underground spring in Jerusalem called the Gihon Spring, which you'll remember there were four of the rivers that broke off the main river in Eden, and one of them is the Gihon, which means a bursting forth. And so there's no overt river that you can see in Jerusalem, but under the surface there is the Gihon Spring, and the Gihon Spring feeds the pool of Siloam. And so during the water drawing ceremony, during Sukkot, and I'm going somewhere with all of this, every morning at dawn, there was this whole thing that would happen where Levites and priests would go down to the pool of Siloam. They would draw water from the pool of Siloam, and then again, that water being fed from the Gihon Spring. And they would take that water, and there would be a processional up to the altar, and there would be singing, because they were going to pour it on the water on the altar, asking the Lord to provide all that we need for the coming year. And as one of the priests would fill the golden pitcher, they would sing from Isaiah 12, 2 and 3 in English, "Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and will not be afraid, for the Lord Adonai is my strength. He also has become my salvation. With joy you will draw water from the wells or the springs of salvation." And so they would be singing, "Ushaftamayim besason mimayeha Yeshua," and the singing and bringing it up. And it was with all of that as the backdrop. Yeshua, we read this in John 7:37, on the last and greatest day of the feast, Yeshua stood up and cried out loudly, "Ho, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink." Right? All you who are thirsty, if you're thirsty, come to me and drink. He had told the woman at the well, the water I give you, you'll never thirst again. I'll give you rivers of living water flowing from within. Why do you keep thinking that whatever you're doing will satisfy your thirst? Yeshua is saying, I'm the source, the river that will sustain you, that will feed you, is from me. Right? So all of your stuff, whatever you look to satisfy you with, it will leave you empty. Even your religious rituals will leave you empty. Your thirst won't be satisfied by the water drawing ceremony, as nice as it may be. On the last and greatest day of the feast, the one who is the fountain of salvation calls out, "The river that you're looking for is right here." And he was pointing toward the fullness that we would have, what's flowing from him. Right? This river of living water flowing from the throne of the Lamb, flowing of the throne of God and the Lamb. In Zechariah 14, points to the end of times, and it points to a Sukkot to come. It talks about when the nations will have waged war on Jerusalem. The Lord himself will fight against those nations, which we've seen in Revelation 19. Zechariah 14:4 says, "In that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which lies to the east of Jerusalem. And the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a huge valley. Half the mountain will move toward the north and half of it toward the south. Moreover, in that day living waters," verse 8, "living waters will flow from Jerusalem right? So waters, living waters is like a river of living waters, will flow from Jerusalem, half toward the eastern sea and half toward the western sea, both in the summer and in the winter. Adonai will then be king over all the earth. In that day, Adonai will be Echad, and his name, Echad, will be one. Verse 16, then all the survivors from all the nations that attack Jerusalem will go up from year to year to worship the king Adonai Tzevaot and to celebrate Sukkot. So what you had, now follow here. So in the beginning, you had flowing from Eden when everything was as it was intended to be. All was perfect. There was no life, there was life, there was no death, right? And flowing from Eden, from that luxuriant place, there was a river that fed other rivers, and one of those was the Gihon bursting forth, right? The spring that sustained Jerusalem underground for thousands of years in the absence of a river is the Gihon spring, a spring that feeds the pool of Siloam. And that pool of Siloam is the water that was taken to the temple altar when Yeshua said, all who are thirsty, come to me and drink, and you'll never thirst again. That pool of Siloam is where we'll remember that the story where the angels stirred the waters and people would go into it for healing. And there was one man who that had been trying for all of those years to go in, but he could never get in time. But it was a healing virtue to those waters. And then we see that when Yeshua returns, it says he'll stand on the Mount of Olives. There's going to be a great shaking. The mountain's going to split, and that breaking will provide a pathway of escape for people, and it will uncover the spring that is deep within, right? It will reveal a bursting forth, a Gihon that flows downstream in two directions. It goes to the Mediterranean, it goes to the Dead Sea. And the Lord pointed to this in this very famous passage in Ezekiel 47. And Ezekiel writes in verse 1, then he brought me back to the door of the house. And behold, water was flowing out from under the threshold of the house eastward, for the front of the house faced east. The water was flowing down from under the right side of the house, south of the altar. He brought me out by way of the north gate and led me around outside by way of the outer gate, the way of the gate looking east. Behold, water was trickling out from the right side. Verse 7, when I had returned, behold, there were very many trees on one side and on the other along the bank of the river. And then he said to me, these waters go out toward the eastern region. They go down to the Arabah and enter the sea. And when they arrive at the sea, the waters of the sea will flow and will become, and the word fresh here is the word for healed. They'll be healed. It's talking about the Dead Sea, by the way. That's the imagery pointing to the east. It's going to go down to the Dead Sea. So coming from the throne room of God, the rivers will flow to the place where there is no life. It's death. Nothing can live in the Dead Sea. It will be that every living creature that swarms will live wherever the rivers go. There will be a very great multitude of fish because this water goes there and makes the salt water fresh or healed. So everything will be healed and live wherever the river goes. Verse 12, on the river, on its bank, on this side and on that side, will grow every kind of tree for food. Its leaf will not wither, its fruit will not fail. It will bear new fruit every month because its water flows out from the sanctuary. Its fruit will be for food, and its leaf will be for healing. Right? So it brings us back to what all of this was all pointing toward. To the ultimate time when God will be dwelling in our midst, flowing from his throne. We will be in his sanctuary forever with an eternal river of living water right down the center of it, a water that brings healing, and life and healing. Again, back to the last chapter, behold, I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, Revelation 21:3, the dwelling of God is among men, and he shall skinyose, he shall tabernacle among them. They shall be his people, and God himself shall be among them and be their God, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And death shall be no more, nor shall there be mourning or crying or pain any longer, for the former things have passed away. And the one seated on the throne said, look, hey, behold, I am making all things new. And then he said, right, for these words are trustworthy. You can depend on it. And they're true. And then he said to me, it is done. It's a perfect verb where it's come to be. It is, it was, it will be. No stopping it. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will freely give from the spring of the water of life. Again, Revelation 22:1. Then the angel showed me a river of living water, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of the city street. On either side of the river was a tree of life bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And verse 3 tells us, no longer will there be any curse. Curse is gone, right? All things are new. All the mourning is gone. The crying, the death is gone. The curse is gone. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. And the language it uses for his servants will serve him is this language that is centered around temple worship. So when we've talked about, last week we talked about how when Satan was thrown out, that he had been, he was described as one who, the language would be that he was a servant of the Lord in terms of dealing with the worship. When we say the worship leader, it's not necessarily just dealing with music, but he was serving the Lord. And he takes a third with him. But now the servants of the Lord, the people that he tried to destroy, we are there fulfilling our purpose, serving the Lord, being all that he has called us to be. Verse 4, which we'll go through this again tomorrow. They shall see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. It's something that is beyond. It's all things new, and it's an amazing. It's just amazing to see the beauty of all of this come together. That this is what the Lord was pointing to. This is what he's pointing to. That he's pointing to all things being new. What was intended, what Yeshua said he would do within us, we begin to see in the fullness of its realization at the end of all things, or the beginning of all things new. So, all right. Well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.